Hi, my name is Sai, and welcome to Code Adventures. Today, we're going to be covering CodingBat's AP code practice, and the first one is called scoresIncreasing. So what they ask is if you're given an array of scores, return true if each score is equal to or greater than the one before. The array will be a length 2 or more. So, a length 2 or more just is extraneous information. You won't need to know it, other than to assure you that you can compare one to the next one. And the two skills you need here are one, to be able to scan an array, to go through an array from the first to the end, and you also need to be able to check if the first one is greater than the second one, because if it is greater than, then it wouldn't be less than or equal to, and then it would be increasing, and then it would just return as false. So what you do here is you start with a for loop to introduce it, and there's two types of for loops you can use. First, you use the traditional for loop, which is you assign a variable, you assign your limit to that variable, which if you're just running an array, you just use scores.length. So then scores is the array that's being inputted, and then you just add every time. And this is the best for loop for this scenario. You can also use a for each loop, which what it does is it just runs. Essentially, it'll just put it into a variable instead of taking the index of scores. So it'll just put the value of scores into the variable. And you can't use this because you need to both scan the one that you're on, but also the one next. And you can't just put x plus 1, because x plus 1 would just be equal that specific score plus 1 to that exact value. So you have to use a traditional for loop. So then you have to be able to check if the first value is greater than the second value, or whatever the first value is in the array, or whatever the next value is. So you use an if loop and you check whether or not it's greater, because if it is greater than the next one, that means it's not in an increasing pattern anymore, and then it would go false. So you use scores, you check the one you're on presently, so 0 for example, and then you also check the one next to it. So the next one would be I plus 1, scores of I plus 1. So, and then of course if this is true, that means that it's no longer increasing, and if it's no longer increasing, then this returns as false. So this is technically the base code, but if you run it, for example, it'll say you're missing a return statement. And the reason this is because if it is increasing and it goes through this and it reaches the end without returning false, then there's no return statement to finish it off, to say it's false or true. So you have to ensure that no matter if all the if statements are wrong, you still have a return. So if they're all less than or equal to, because they're not greater than, then they would be true. And then it would return as true. And then so you think it would finish now, but whenever you run it, you get an index out of bounds. And the problem is this only works if you're using I minus 1 or I. If you're using I plus 1, and for example the scores, if the length is 3, the max you go to is 2. So if this is 2, that's the max value in the array. But if you go to I plus 1, that'd be 2 plus 1. And 2 plus 1 is scores of 3, but if it's a length of 3, you don't get scores 3, you get scores 2 as the max, because 0 is the starting point. So that creates an index out of bounds. So there's two solutions to this. The one that most people gravitate towards would be to use a minus 1 at the end, and that will solve it relatively well. That's the simpler solution. But what you can also do is you can just start at 1, and then you can remove this. And what you do is, instead of comparing I to I plus 1, you can compare I minus 1 to I. And that also works pretty well. So this would be this is probably one of the easiest problems you'll get on the AP test. It is definitely a plausible. It's one that they'll ask you, but they'll ask you in a probably more complex form. These basic skills. The part that makes it the most difficult if you get this specific type of program is that they ask it in a word problem, which makes it kind of confusing to understand. But this is a skill that if you can't learn for the AP, if you don't know for the AP test, you're not going to do well. But yeah, thank you for watching.